Hi all, it's Mike at Foundation IT. This is the third and probably final video we'll do on this subject. AVD versus RDS, Azure Virtual Desktop and remote desktop services. RDS is a fantastic technology. It's been reliable. It's certainly well deployed. And as we'll see, it's still widely deployed and used. A number of our clients have asked us about what does it look like if we were to move, what does change look like, where are the benefits, and in the previous two videos we've gone into quite a lot of detail about the technical differences and supportability of AVD versus RDS. And I think we're unapologetically biased towards AVD because whilst RDS is great, AVD is the modern upstart. It's the most likely successor to RDS longer term, particularly as more organizations adopt Microsoft 365 technologies and adopt public cloud. And if it's a Microsoft house, then they're most likely to go into Azure. One of the things that prompted us to do the videos in the first place, and we will draw a couple of conclusions on the videos that Toby and James have done, which you can find on our YouTube channel, is the Microsoft statement that 10% of Azure workloads are dedicated to RDS, which certainly shocked me. I know it shocked a few colleagues. You know, what does that represent globally in terms of consumption revenue? Maybe $3 billion, something like that. I mean, it's huge. And that coupled with the fact that several of our clients who experienced RDS in the cloud, we moved them away, and the outcomes that they experienced prompted us to kind of look at this. From a cost perspective, and this is at a very high level because it's extremely difficult to draw comparisons when there are so many variables in terms of number of users and use cases and what applications are running. So it's a pretty raw comparison. If we take scenario X, which isn't on the screen, of organization that's got a on-premise deployment of RDS, hasn't fully sweated the hardware assets, and perhaps doesn't have a strategic obligation or plan at this stage to move to cloud, then not a easy sell to the board when it comes to justifying the cost of moving, because there's a cost associated with the change, and you've got to justify moving away from hardware which hasn't been fully marked down. If you're coming to a point where the hardware is end of life, and there's the potential of a very large capital expenditure bill to buy and replace new hardware, and in particular, if you're already invested in Microsoft 365, it starts to become quite an easy argument to say, well, I think we should consider adopting AVD in Azure. When we compare RDS deployments in Azure versus AVD, which is obviously native to Azure, the comparisons get slightly harder. And if we're just comparing and trying to answer the question of, is it cheaper to run AVD in Azure versus RDS? Then the politician's answer again is it depends. There are some differences, and depending on the size of the environment and what you're looking to achieve, AVD can win out in a number of areas. Clearly, if you're already licensed for Microsoft 365 or Windows 10 Enterprise, there's no additional cost associated with deploying AVD outside of the Azure consumption costs. So in a scenario where you've got an investment in M365 and you're having to pay for RDS CALs and a cost associated with the control plane, then AVD wins out. From a consumption perspective, in the example we're going to go through, that particular organization did see a cost benefit because of the dynamic scaling that we're able to implement within the AVD environment. So the resource costs itself wasn't any more or less expensive, but the way with which it was deployed and the automation that we placed over the top of that, so that it was only on for the periods it needed to be on, and it scaled dynamically according to how many users needed to use the platform, that led to a consequential cost saving. But it's unlikely that you're going to go to the board and say, right, here's our 50% budget or savings that we can apply to the budget this year. It's perhaps a bit more nuanced than that. And I think the holistic business case for a move, when you consider the elasticity, the automation, the supportability, the user experience, and the fact that there are some potential cost benefits to be had, is where AVD really shines through. The other factor here, and this was seen within the case study that we're going to talk about, manufacturing business, about 100 RDS users globally. They use this for remote access to a key ERP application. They had challenges with their existing RDS environment, which was hosted in Azure. It had been there for a little while. There were problems with the setup and configuration of that RDS environment. It wasn't as secure as it needed to be. There wasn't an awful lot of resilience wrapped around the environment. The servers were, to use a technical term, flaky. We weren't always sure if we took them offline whether they were going to come back up again. So there was already an ongoing conversation about should we either modernize, move to AVD, consider rebuilding the RDS environment or whatever, and we'd started to go down the route of yes, let's move to AVD. It was also costly. It was costly because it was always on, and as a result of the servers being flaky, they were nervous about taking it offline for any period of time. So it was always on. It was quite expensive to run. And then a host failed. It kind of cemented the challenges with the environment. It threw a number of users off. They were unable to work for a period of time. We very quickly mobilized a project to move them across to AVD. The transition time wasn't that bad. I think we had users on the platform within 3 days, aided by the Nerdio tooling that we use to deploy these environments. And I think it was in sort of full support mode within a week, 6-7 days, something like that. But what we found off the back of that wasn't just the fact we were able to save a little bit of money on month-by-month consumption costs. That was definitely a green tick in the box. We were able to actually, in line with saving money, also add a little bit of resilience so that it would fail over in the event that a host failed or the environment failed. We certainly saw a reduction in tickets into the service desk, which was partly down to the fact that it was a new and shiny environment, which always helps. But also the fact that because it's a Windows 10 experience, a bit more familiarity from the users versus, say, a Windows Server experience, we were able to troubleshoot the issues a bit more easily because we have greater visibility within the environment. So the cost or the time to resolution was far less. That in turn improved individual uptime, service uptime, user productivity, all that kind of good stuff. So in this example, we both had a marginal cost saving that we could demonstrate, but there was also evidence, and it's always very difficult to measure this, that there were financial benefits in the form of productivity gains created by service uptime, staff morale, and usability, which is obviously another factor here. Would I go into a board and justify a move to Azure Virtual Desktop purely on the basis of cost? If the scenario was right, yes, absolutely. But I actually think there's a far stronger business case in modernizing the approach when you consider the Windows 10 experience, when you consider the dynamic and automated scaling to accommodate more users, particularly in a scenario where you've got, in a pandemic scenario where you've perhaps got 300 users that very quickly need to have a remote working solution, whereas normally there's maybe 50 to 100. The environment can cope with that sort of dynamic elasticity. For us as a managed service provider, being able to support the environment adequately, both in terms of individual issues and the global environment, is really important. And we just, particularly with the Nerdio tooling that we use and the skill set we've got within our team, find the AVD environment much easier to manage. Our time to resolution is reduced, and it's proved to be more reliable. And yes, there is a cost benefit that we can potentially garner from a move. So I think all in all, yes, there is a a slight winner in the right scenario towards AVD when it comes to cost, particularly if there's already investment in the M365 and Windows 10 Enterprise licensing. The business case gets far stronger when you look at the other components covered in some of the other material that we've put out recently. And clearly we're very interested in understanding whether we've missed anything within this kind of video series. So do please feed back to us on things we've missed, questions that you want to see answered. We'll get our best team on that, probably not me. And yeah, I'm certainly interested in connecting with people on LinkedIn. So do reach out, connect to me on there, and we'll see you soon. Cheers.